Okay. Just check. All right, we still have some participants coming in, so we'll just give it a moment here and allow some more people to join. All right. And with that, let's get started. Welcome everybody to Lumifi Cyber's SOC Quarterly Threat Brief. We are covering Q3 of this year and what happened. I'm Anthony Red Hat August Radzykewycz. I'm the offensive threat detection engineer here, working in the content team. And alongside me, I have.
Hi, everybody. Jake Johnson, also a member of the content team here at Lumifi.
All right. So what we're going to be talking about in this presentation are going to be split within four categories, if you will, four sections. We'll get started by showcasing some CVEs that we felt were notable, followed by some notable KEVs. Those are the things that are actually happening in the world, followed by more detailed coverage of some security incidents and news. And a big disclaimer here is simply, this is certainly not all encompassing. We had to pick between a plethora of different things. This is what we chose. And then what we're doing here as far as the Lumifi detection engineering to better protect you. So I'll let Jake take over to start with our notable CVEs.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. So as Anthony mentioned, these are not all encompassing. These are, some of the notable CVEs that we identified here that we have probably talked with you guys about in our, bi-weekly meetings and stuff. So starting it off, we have a couple from Microsoft that came out. This first one, the 9.1 Windows Network Virtualization. The big talking point on this one is it did allow an attacker to bypass the blocks between a virtual network and the normal network. If they exploited it, they could escape that host and get out, see what other stuff is connected to the network, and go from there. Two more that came up was this Microsoft project one, which was allowing remote code execution by uploading corrupted files to a system. It would then read the code in the files and allow for that. And then the final one was the Hyper-V, allowed complete privilege escalation up to system level if it was exploited. Next page, please. Next one is the Avanti. I'm just going to touch on this one because we are going into it a little bit later. But this top one, the 9.8C critical for the virtual traffic manager, pretty serious, easily exploitable. That's the one we're going to cover later. The cloud service appliance, two of them that go on, they kind of could be chained together. First one allowed an unauthenticated user to access it. And then the second one it required admin level privileges, which is why the score is a little bit lower. But, chaining it together, they could get that access and then do what they need to do, whether that's traversal, remote code functionality, things like that. Cups, I'm just going to kind of let you guys look at this one. This one we will be going into detail later as well. Anthony has a whole section on that one. So it's this page and the next page. And then finally, some of the miscellaneous ones that aren't really necessarily tied to other chains or, one of the bigger companies such as Microsoft. First one, SolarWinds. This one was a chain. It ranged between a 7.4 and a 9.4, depending on which one it was. It happened in the SolarWinds Access Rights Manager, and it gave the ability for arbitrary file deletion, leakage of sensitive information, as well as remote code execution, depending on how far along the chain they got. And then the final one was something that we just wanted to bring up. You can see that the score is a little bit lower, that Twilio Authy. What happened there is they were able to access numbers, such as your phone number, find out that if it is registered for this Twilio Authy or not. And luckily there was no accounts compromised at the point or at this time, which is why it's so low, but it did give the attackers an idea onto who is using what, which then could be leveraged down the road for later authentication bypass.
All right, thanks, Jake. I'm going to step in here and cover our notable KEVs. Again, remember the KEV is the known exploited vulnerabilities. So it's a little different than CVEs and the fact that these are things that are happening actively, and CISA puts it on their KEV catalog, right? It covers what it is, and they're observing this behavior. So again, we're going to cover our big companies here. Microsoft has a Windows Power Dependency Coordinator used after free vulnerability that allows the escalation, privilege escalation to system. Then we have this one right here, which is Windows MSI files. This is for various applications, and the vulnerability actually exists in two parts. The main part is how MSI files are handled. And then the secondary part is the fact that any user can run MSI exec on the system to effectuate the repair of that application that's already installed. Cool part about this presentation, or at least I think so, is I'm actually going to demonstrate this vulnerability and the exploitation of it toward the end of this presentation. So stick around for that. The last thing, and I just thought this was really interesting. There's a lot of talk about it actively being exploited again, which is the Windows Mark of the Web vulnerability here. What that is when you download a file off of the internet, it'll have something called Mark of the Web. So if you try to execute it, it'll tell you, hey, this was downloaded from the internet. Are you sure you want to run it, right? It also runs it through some verifications to see if it is malware based on this marking to say, hey, Windows Defender, make sure this is okay. So malicious actors have various ways, right? There's not just one way to bypass the Mark of the Web being on that file. And again, it is actively being exploited in the wild. Now, this moves us on to Ivanti, and you'll notice that I only have one listed here, and that's for Endpoint Manager. Believe it or not, SQL injection still exists, very much so, and it is being exploited in the wild. However, something I want to note is every single CVE that was listed in the aforementioned section is actually also a KEV. So these CVEs came out, this year. I think this one fell outside of the quarter just by a little bit, but all of them are being exploited, together. So Avanti's got, they got some action going on the malicious side. Now, these ones I thought were interesting with Adobe. We have a 9.8 rating for Adobe Commerce for the versions 2.4.7, 2.4.6 P5, so on. You can check the table on the right, the description here. But this allows for XXE vulnerability, or it's an XXE vulnerability. So, it allows that code execution from crafted XML documents that reference that. Now, this one I thought was a bit more phantasmic, if you will. I was surprised by this, to be honest, because if you look at the CVE, it's all the way back from 2013, right? I had to look at this. It's so old, it doesn't even have a CVSS rating, but apparently within this quarter, Adobe Flash Player, which has been discontinued back in 2020, I believe, is still actively being exploited in the wild. So, especially with this one, our advice would be to, remove this, figure out what you need to do, why that's still on your system. It's been end of life for 4 years now, but they're seeing this behavior. Now, some miscellaneous ones, we have a 9.8 rating, so critical for Oracle WebLogic Server, remote unauthenticated code execution, right? So we got unauthenticated RCE available for this. and then a 7.2 rating for VMware ESXi, which is an escape from or an escape to guests. So you get into the machine and you can escape out of it, which are pretty coveted because a lot of our cloud computing, especially in VMware, right? If you can pop out of that VM session and into something else, you obviously have a much, much stronger foothold. All right, with this, we are going to split up the security incident news kind of half and half, and I'll hand it off to Jake to get us started there.
Thank you. So this first one we wanted to talk about is something that I am sure everybody in this room is well aware happened, that being the CrowdStrike outage from July. Potentially the largest IT outage in history, if not, guaranteed that it is. It impacted approximately 8.5 million devices worldwide. Some of the affected areas were airlines, banking, public transit, healthcare, financial services, anybody using this CrowdStrike system on Windows machines. The cause of this was an update was pushed out without, going through the proper testing channels. Didn't fully get caught where there was a file, the channel 291 file, and it had a bug in it that would continually restart the Windows systems. This would eventually lead to a blue screen of death. Fixing this was no easy means. It wasn't something that could just be patched out. Due to this, it cost US Fortune 500 companies an estimated 5.4 billion in damages. As of, I believe, yesterday or the day before, Delta has officially sued CrowdStrike for 500 million. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Anthony. We'll see how that goes in court. Could set a pretty major precedent. As of August 8th, CrowdStrike published an external root cause analysis to put forward business plan changes. What happened, what we did wrong, moving forward, what are we going to be doing to prevent this, as well as due to this affecting Windows systems, a lot of heat came against Microsoft for this. They have reimagined what they're going to be doing moving forward, where this was and still does exist in the kernel of the Microsoft systems or the Windows systems. They put out a report, I believe last month or earlier this month, where they were talking about in the future, they may be kicking all, third-party applications out of that kernel. Could have pretty big benefits and drawbacks. We will see what happens with that. That's not going to be put in place till, Q1, Q2 next year, if it does. Customer call to action. Hopefully everything is fixed on your guys' end at this point. If it's still having issues and you guys are still getting that blue screen of death, we can help. Access each individual device, remove the problematic file. It's that channel 291.sys file. The problem with this and what took so long is, the IT needed to provide a 48-digit numerical BitLocker for every machine, sometimes multiple times, to get that off. Moving on to what we helped you guys with, we were there proactively calling customers that may be impacted. Those of you guys that we knew use CrowdStrike, providing this remediation guidance, getting you in touch with the CrowdStrike representatives that work with us, everything like that. Hopefully you didn't have to deal with us, but if you did, glad we could help. Moving on to the next one. This one does seem a little bit of out of left field, but I'll tie it back into security at the end. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there was that major supply chain attack, kind of took over the news for a little bit. The timeline of this was September 17th, approximately 3,000 pagers in Lebanon exploded, maiming and killing Hezbollah officials, followed by the next day, some walkie-talkies doing, pretty much the same thing. Like I said, despite this not being a cyber incident, there is a good tie-in for this. This is a real-world example of a supply chain attack that's getting people's attention. It's kind of making people rethink supply chain security that they have. Going on to that, our customer call to action, what we want to remind everybody of, and I've got some stats here to back this up, this isn't just something that can affect, actual hardware. This is something that goes in with software. This goes in with code, a lot of different things. It's rising over the past couple of years. And as of mid-August, there's been around 90 claimed supply chain breaches, just, throughout the world. 31 of those were against US targets. And of the 90 claimed supply chain breaches, the biggest target was IT providers. 30 of those 90 were targeted towards them, followed by tech products, with 14. The downside of this is when you're looking at a software supply chain breach, it's kind of hard to say. There's a lot of open source libraries out there that many companies use. Valid reasons to use so. If it's already out there, why take the time building yourself, especially if it works? That does put it in the open source domain, makes it a little bit easier for these supply chains to attack. Going off of that, for specifically attacks on software supply chain, they are occurring at the rate of at least 1 every 2 days so far this year. So it is something that is happening. It's not getting quite enough press, which is why we wanted to bring it back to those pagers. Moving on from that, what we want you guys to do or consider is curate your third-party software, hardware, code, everything that you guys are bringing in from outside. Create what you can, but ensure the source authenticity and traceability of everything that you can't use. This should help prevent or at least mitigate what damage can be done through that. Something you can do to help for that is monitor your code bases. Many of the supply chains start with those open source libraries I talked about earlier, as well as maintaining a software bill of materials. Kind of seems tedious, but knowing every technology that you guys are using allows us to help you guys by monitoring for these softwares being used, looking for these vulnerabilities, and then conduct vulnerability scans as often as you can. That's going to be, probably the best help in identifying vulnerabilities through these code bases. Moving on to Ivanti, as we discussed earlier on in the CVEs and the KEVs section, they kind of got hit pretty hard this quarter with several vulnerabilities that came through. Quick timeline of when it happened. August 12th, the vulnerability was disclosed. Next day, the CVEs were assigned to it. They put out a report saying, this is what's happening. This is how it's happening. We're aware of this. We have patches planned. In the meantime, they gave some, mitigations that could be taken to prevent that until the patches. August 19th is when the patches came out. And then just over a month later, these CVEs were upgraded to KEVs. Downside about putting this out there is some of them did have POCs, which were able to then be easily replicated. And we can show you how easily that was on this next slide. So for this main one, the CVE 2024-7593, what it allowed attackers to do is create an admin account. They didn't need to be authenticated. They could just access the Ivanti virtual traffic manager webpage, go through that app's ZXTM wizard path, and then just append to the end this error 1 management local user or section access management local users, and then pass the data below. It's creating a form. It's adding this user to the admin group, and then they get to provide the user name and the password. Once they did this, they can just log into the application, no checks after that. Gave them almost full access to it. Pretty big deal. This is the one that was rated 9.8. Moving on, what we ask you guys to do is make sure you're updated. If you are on Ivanti, we did talk to the customers, last month during when this was happening. Put up some of the patch versions right here. We'll take a moment for you guys to take in that sheet, make sure everything is good. And then moving on from there, what we are doing here at Lumifi and what we promise to continue doing is performing these continual threat research, threat hunts, investigations into any kind of vulnerability that comes out such as this, providing you guys the steps needed to either mitigate, patch, and offering all of our help that we have been and will continue to do so. Now that that is over, I will let Anthony go into this cups exploit, something that he was pretty happy about when he started reading about it.
Yeah, so if you haven't heard about this, well, welcome. This was, how would I say? The way that I put it, I was like, oh, something's coming. It's going to affect all Linux systems. This might be the next Heartbleed. This might be the next shell shock. I have no idea. And a whole lot of dramatization happened around this particular exploit chain. A 9.9 critical rating, almost a 10. Oh my God, the world of Linux is going to implode. So let's get into it, and let's get into the reality of it, or at least the reality of a lot of looking into it, a lot of paying attention since the actual notes were released. So, security researcher Simone Margaritelli, and I'm sorry if I butchered your name, sir, but he discovered and reported vulnerabilities in Open Printing's CUPS stack. So CUPS is the common Unix printing system. It's the thing that makes print servers in Linux or Nix-based systems works with printers, right? However, out of this came 4 CVEs, and notice I call it an exploit chain. It wasn't just a 9.9 rating of a previously known issue, spoiler alerts here, but it's an exploit chain. There is a sequence that these things need to follow in order for the remote code execution to properly be effectuated. Now, with that, the primary one that people were concerned about is cups browse D. What that is it is the web page service or the daemon that runs in the background that utilizes cups, right? So it's the management portion of cups through the web browser. Now, alongside this, we had another one for libs cups filter, which didn't do sanitization. And therefore, when you were doing an IPP, printer object, if you will, then you could throw in the CF get printer attributes 5 into that, whatever you wanted, the attacker controlled data in order to, throw your execution in there. Now, libppd was also another thing in terms of how this was accessed and the fact that it created, that printer object. And the big key point, the known one, right, the one where it gets executed through the PPD file, is actually through the cups filter package, which is the fumatic rip attribute in the file. And this you can add code to it. Now it's interesting, and note I said this has been known. This has existed. The developers at Open Printing are like, yeah, unfortunately, this is just like SMTP, right? We're stuck. We're stuck in needing to do this to support, how so many of these developers deal with printing on Linux. And some of the stuff it's wild. Like they're throwing Perl statements in there in order to do the print jobs. They're throwing all sorts of different kind of code. So they had to leave this parameter in there, this attribute in that file for those things to continue working. They remove it, it's broken, like all over. So how does this exploit chain work? Well, the way that Simone put it is you have a UDP port 631 open to the internet, okay? Communication to that port happens, and through that communication, the print server, right, the cup service responds to you. So you send it some data and it will respond to you. Now, manipulating that data, you can create a printer object, aka a printer queue, or what you see when you print to it, right? Inside this data that the attacker controls, they use the fumatic rip command line parameter to inject whatever code that they want. This is the remote code execution part that's stored within that PPT file, right? Now, there's a component here, and a big component at that. And that is that it requires end user involvement. In order for the code to execute, they need to print to the newly created PPD file object. Okay, so they need to go, they need to print, they need to choose that printer that was created, and then the remote code execution will occur. So we have some issues here, right? As far as likelihood of this being a really big deal. And honestly, the bottom line, hold on. Yep, there we go. Slides moving a little slow. Bottom line is the widespread impact of this is actually pretty unlikely. There are some implications that are happening, but reporting is all over the place. I don't know how many articles I read about this, and Simone's post, I mean, I respect it, right? I think it's incredible. I was very excited about all of it, But I feel that some of his reporting was also a bit misleading. Why do I say that? Because outside of his report, I saw ranges of, oh, there's 7,171 affected devices all the way to 107,000 devices. And I don't remember what Simone put, but he put, oh, look at all these connections that are being made back when I run netstat. But those netstat connections do not necessarily mean that it's strictly from that UDP 631. Now, if he made that clarification, I want to say he was saying 200, 300,000 connections, which would be, that'd be astronomical, right? But reports are all over the place. Now with this, Lumify Cyber, through me, ran a Shodan scan on October 9th as I was kind of exploring, okay, what does this look like in Shodan, right? And I pulled 69,983 devices that were exposed with cups on the internet as found by Shodan. Now, I'm not saying that's 100% source of truth. There's other systems that I certainly could have used. However, it's very key to understand that this was not strictly UDP 631. This was not strictly the impacted vulnerable versions of cups that exist. Okay. So the number, as I found, would be much less than the approximate 70,000 devices that were pulled back. Now, again, having a cups system, right? Having a print server open and available on the open internet is also going to be a very uncommon practice. That certainly would be a bad practice, not even, oh, you're not following best practices. That would be a bad practice, all right? So if you have that in your organization, like, take care of it. But uh, it's user interaction, exposing a port that shouldn't be exposed to, the public internet. Um, a lot of devices aren't really reporting back for the searching, so I feel that Simone's approach was, yeah, I was a bit inflammatory. I was a bit, uh, how would I say, like exaggerative about, what's going on. But that was because if I didn't do that, I was trying so hard to work with them to get it fixed. They were refusing. They were just dismissing me. They were saying it's not an issue. So this is what I resorted to doing, which I can understand. However, we have malicious actors in the wild all over the place, and there were some signs of attempted bot activity. Just kind of, as these bots are made, they take the spaghetti, they throw it against the wall, they see if it sticks. However, I did not see any, mass exploitation of this particular vulnerability. And also that 9.9 rating for that particular CVE that was initially claimed, it got dropped pretty dramatically as well when all of these pieces were put together. So it started off as a 9.9, but I think it ended off at a 7 point something. And that'll be in our printed report if you care to look at that. Now, let's see here. There's a couple other things that I'd like you to consider. Now, being the offensive threat detection engineer, I try to put myself in the mind of the attacker, right? And I felt, oh, UDP publicly available on the open internet. Okay, that's not likely. But you know what might be likely? If I'm inside a network, it might be there. On top of that, though, right? So I'm saying there might be from like a pen tester or a red team perspective. If I gain access to your network, now that changes that whole barrier, right? The barrier of entry of me gaining more exploitation through this. However, let's say UDP 631 is blocked on that local network. Well, we can use something like Responder and do MDNS spoofing, and that will create the same exact communication channel as the attacker would need for that UDP 631 access. So there's other ways to do this, and that's really important to know and understand. Now, outside of Simone's, this is outside of Simone's posting as well, right? That other researchers took this and they discovered these things. But one other thing that I felt was a lot more incredible and a lot more likely to effectuate that remote code execution is not adding a new printer object, but replacing the default one. This has happened in multiple pen tests before that, I'm aware of the people who did this using SNMP to replace printer drivers. They come into work. Oh, we got a driver update. It's that printer over there. We trust it. They click it, they update, they move on. In this case, it literally would just be printing to that object because it's stored in the cup system. And then that remote code execution would happen. Now, all this being said, if I have a local area network, access, I'm going to be trying all sorts of other things, but this is a vector that is a possibility. Now, I don't have it in the presentation. This is something that I became a little bit more aware of recently, but that's also the idea of DDoS amplification attacks. Very interesting concept. This, I think, has a lot more likelihood of being utilized in terms of finding these open and vulnerable cup systems, which are even older than this depicted one, I believe. But they found that you could send one packet to these systems, and most of the systems will end up in an infinite response loop to the device that initiated the packet. So if you're familiar with what a Smurf attack is, this is a perfect way to execute that. For those that don't know what Smurf attack is, it's a crafted packet that, say for instance, I'm the attacker and I'm attacking your system. I would send the packet to, I don't know, let's just say Ivanti system, since they're getting picked on a lot this quarter, right? So I send it to Ivanti and I say, oh, hey, here's this data request. In this case, it would be cups, right? So I'd send it to the cups service, but I would frame the packet as though it looked like it came from you. So when cups looks at this packet, just the networking utilization, right? How it works is it would say, oh, you are the one that sent the request, not me. And so therefore it's not going to respond to me, it's going to respond to you. Now I could use that in a DDoS attack by pointing my packets, a lot of these affected servers, and hit it with that one packet, and it's going to be amplified, I think, on the lower side if I sent a jumbo packet, like a really big one, which will result in a larger response. I believe it was, oh gosh, I think it was like 6.3 times amplification. But how much does a packet cost for me? I mean, it's next to nothing. And if it's in an infinite loop, this amplification DDoS attack can be leveraged through these vulnerable systems. But again, the research showed that there were very, very, very old systems still open and accessible online. So it goes well beyond like normal updating practices for those. Now, what do we want you to do in this event? What needs to be done? If you're not using cups, remove it. If you're unsure, just disable it. Okay. Um, on your firewall, right? On your edge device here, block UDP port 631, right? Just make sure that it's not being allowed through it. And hopefully you're doing like a default deny, right? But just make sure that no UDP 631 traffic is going into your network at all. Now, if for the local side of things, if you don't need DNS SD traffic, disable it, right? So that's going to prevent me from doing that MDNS spoofing with Responder on your local network. And of course, what do we always say, when a vulnerability comes out? Patch it, do your updates. So make sure that they are updated beyond the versions that are listed here. These are the versions that are impacted by the vulnerability. However, I didn't want to get into the weeds of all of the different possibilities because each distribution provider or operating system provider has their own methodologies. And I will say, for Debian-based systems, for instance, it could be as easy as an apt update, apt upgrade on cups, right? So they'll have it in their repositories, but each one seemed to be kind of at a different cycle. Now, for us, we do the continuous threat research. We're looking for the best coverage. Applicable detections are made out of that research based on the likelihood that that is going to happen and what the log data looks like if it's happening on the system. And of course, we're doing these quarterly threat briefs for you to inform you on, what's going on as well. Of course, we couple this with the threat hunting and we have our analysts doing their things as well. So we're doing the best we can to make sure that all these new things that are coming out and coming to light are covered in terms of protecting you. Now, here's a change of pace, all right? Instead of just talking about the doom and gloom of these CVEs and these KEVs and all the bad things that are happening, well, guess what? On August 29th of this year, we had a multinational event of taking down one of the largest botnets that we've known, right? This has been gone by multiple names, but Qbot was probably the most recent name that it's been coined as. And that botnet infected over 700,000 devices. So the FBI, in concert with the other nations that are listed here, were able to dismantle this botnet. And, we just wanted to share, we consider this to be an incredibly huge win, protecting or at least dismantling over 700,000 devices. Now, a little bit of background in this, and again, it'll be in the written portion of the threat brief, but the FBI did something I felt was pretty interesting, which was they leveraged the botnet power. All right, all that access that was already initiated, all that control to those zombie computers. And they removed it that way from the infected devices. So it even went beyond like just taking down the website, right? But they went into those computers through the botnet and did all the necessary code and cleanup. And then from what I've read, they reached out to the infected or the owners of the infected devices to let them know, hey, this is what we did. And, they allege that nothing else happened, just the removal. But I thought that was pretty interesting. It's like, you gave us the groundwork for removing your stuff. And boom, it's cleaned out of every single of the affected devices that they were able to still control through the botnet. So really big win. We love to see it. We love to share it. And there's other things that I could talk about in terms of wins, but we'll probably get into that next quarter. Now, with all that being said, like I said, this is the part that I was really excited about, and that is to show the local privilege escalation using the MSI installer vulnerability. So this is that KEV that I was talking about, and I'll be able to demonstrate that here. So let me go ahead and jump on my laptop here. Let's see. And let me just get a heartbeat here. Oh, great. What do they say about the demo gods? They hate everyone. Okay, so let me stop sharing. I'm not sure if you saw it on my side, but had all of this prepped, had all of it ready, and my VM decided to literally just shut down. While I bring this back up, I want to open this up. Well, one thing first, the exploit as I'm going through, there's gonna be a pause, right? There's some stuff that has to happen behind the scenes. I'll explain kind of what's going on as I'm doing it. But you know, this is why they don't make too many hacker movies in Hollywood, right? It's not inherently interesting to see, or at least to most people, to see that long pause of, oh, okay, you know, here's a progress bar, right? So we'll open it up for questions, but while I'm getting this ready, are there any questions that you have about anything that we've covered so far in this presentation? Please let us know in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions in the chat, and I just reshared the screen here. Could I get a heartbeat on this? A verification that you see the screen. Awesome. Got the thumbs up from Jake. So let me explain what in the world this is. This is a vulnerability within MSI files. What is MSI? It's a Microsoft installer file that's used for mass deployments. You can use it on your standalone computer as well, but generally speaking, we use this when we want to install a piece of software through an automated system such as SCCM, right? Now, the vulnerability here is that the system user is used to read, write, delete, or something else. There's one other option that it can do to files that are on the system for a repair operation. So what does this mean? There's some prerequisites for this particular privilege escalation. The first prerequisite is you have to have a GUI. You have to have that GUI. This is not solely a command line execution operation here. On top of that, you do not want Edge to be the default browser on that system. So you can do this through Firefox or Chrome, and you're going to see that here in a moment. Now, from there, you also have to have the vulnerable MSI file on the system to start that repair command. Now, to make it easier, the Google Zero Day project has a repository of code, and I'm going to be using one of those applications called setoplock. And you'll see here on the screen that it says setoplock for this particular file in the PDF24 folder here, fax prn-inst.log, and there's an R at the end. So what this means is when I do this installation procedure, anything that touches this file that does a read to this file, stop it. Stop that process in its tracks. Don't let it go any further. Put it on pause. Okay. So I am going to execute that, and that's all you see right here. That's it. It's just waiting for that file to be read. Now from here in another command line window, I have MSI exec /FA forcing all of the repairs using this vulnerable MSI file. Now this is where it's going to get both really boring and really exciting in terms of, here we go. Let's press, come on. There. As far as just waiting for these windows. But if any of you have repaired an application, right? Something went wrong with this. You have the repair option, or you go through the control panel, all programs and features. I know I'm getting a little old school because that's like prior to Windows 10, right? But you go through that and you choose a repair. That's the same exact thing that's happening. So here you see that it's just saying, hey, the application's open, automatically close it. It's all normal stuff. So it says, yeah, it wasn't able to close it, so you might have to restart the computer when we're done. Again, very typical application installing or repairing behavior. Nothing new here. Now, with setup lock as well, it's kind of key to note that if I did not put that into place, this is really hard to act on, simply because the thing that you're going to see pop up as a resultant of this would pop up and go away immediately. And having the time to do the things that need to happen from that pop-up would be near impossible. Like, we may not even be able to see it if I did not have this in place. So again, if there's any questions, comments, concerns, please throw it out in the chat. I'd love to hear from you while we wait for this to finish off here. All right, seems like I bought enough time anyway. So this is the window that I'm referring to. You see, we have C programs PDF 24, PDF 24 printer install.exe, right? Here is the op lock screen. If I want to continue and just continue moving forward through this process, I could press enter, but that's not what I want to do. It also is important, I didn't prove this, but I am the user, you can see right here, test. And this is a normal user account. Just add a, end user level, local user account here. That's all it is. No special permissions whatsoever. However, this comes up, and this is where it gets interesting. We're going to right click on the title bar, go to properties, and then inside properties, we have this legacy console mode down here near the bottom. So we click on that, and it will ask us, hey, which web browser? Oh, can't see my screen. Well, that would definitely defeat the purpose. Hey, Jake, how's that looking?
I've been able to see it the whole time, so.
You've been able to see it. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's see. So if you open up the grid for the video here, let me see, let me grab this. Let me pop that open maybe. Oh boy. There we go. Oh yeah. Hold on.
Okay,
Oh,
we're
I got
getting chats from other
another
people.
person who said they can see it. I want to make sure y'all are seeing this because, like I said, I thought it was cool. I like sharing cool things. All right, so I unfortunately, for the individual that told me they couldn't see it, I apologize. I'm getting verification. I'd like to move forward because we are running out of time here. But for those of you who can't see it, here is the list of browsers that you can use. I'm going to use Firefox. And I like to uncheck to always use this app to not set it default to this operation, right? I want to choose every single time. So with this, I'm going to press OK. And what does it do? It opens up Firefox, and you're like, and I'm not going to set it as primary browser right now. And why does this matter? Well, check it out. There's one last thing that you can do. Now from here, in Firefox, I am going to press on my keyboard Control and the O key. That's to open. All right, open a file. Now, for those of you who have hacked before, you'll notice what directory I'm in, right? This is pretty cool. But inside the directory path window here, I'm just going to simply type cmd.exe and press enter to open up a command prompt. And now, check it out. Who am I? Full system. So this is the demonstration of exploitation of this particular vulnerability on my system from a low-level user all the way to system. All right, now let me stop sharing this. And make sure that the presentation is still sharing. We good on that, Jake? All right, sounds good. I lost my presentation controls here. Okay, give me a moment. Let's do. Like I said, the demo gods. They have their thing. All right, there we go. So to finish this off, in this quarter, we're not going to read all of these to you. That would be very monotonous and, I don't think worthwhile of our time. But these are the new detections we've developed in quarter 3. We have a lot more coming in quarter 4. And to include detection for the exact exploitation that I showed you, we'll have detection for that on your environment if it ever comes up. All right. Last chance here. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns for either Jake or myself? All right. Well, if there's no questions, I would like to personally thank you for attending Lumifi Cyber's quarter 3 SOC threat brief. It definitely was a good time for me. I really enjoyed talking about this stuff and sharing our research with you all. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, everybody.